Before the great kings, before the deluge that reshaped the earth's countenance, there existed a man, unassuming, yet destined for profound revelations. His name was Enoch, a man who walked with God and was graced with the faculty to perceive beyond mortal comprehension.
Why? Why was I taken?
You must see. You must bear witness.
Enoch, a man like any other, yet chosen to witness the universe's most recondite secrets, beheld that which was not permitted to mortals.
They will destroy everything, all of it.
You have seen the crime. You have seen the consequence.
His journey was not merely a quest for knowledge, but a weighty burden. For what he uncovered would forever transmute the destiny of humankind and the very firmament.
And you must see the source of the chaos.
Enoch not only witnessed the mysteries of the cosmos, but was borne beyond terrestrial confines to the celestial realms, where the secrets of chaos and order converged. He was conveyed to the very crucible of creation, a place where past and future intermingled, where the transgressions of the fallen angels, known as the Watchers, had overflowed and irrevocably altered the trajectory of life. These potent celestial beings descended to earth, defying divine edicts, seducing the daughters of humankind, and begetting a progeny of giants that threatened to annihilate all that was virtuous in creation.
They broke the laws of heaven. They abandoned their posts.
They sinned with the daughters of men.
But who were these fallen angels? What impelled them to disobey the divine decree? And what were the ramifications of this rebellion?
A brood of monsters was born. A plague upon the earth.
Throughout his celestial sojourn, Enoch not only encountered the fallen angels, but was divinely tasked with witnessing and recording the impending judgment. A judgment that would impact not merely the creatures of earth, but all of creation. "Write, Enoch," the Lord said to him, "write so that future generations may know the truth." But Enoch knew that this truth would be rejected by many. The knowledge he carried was weighty, not only for its significance, but also for its complexity and power. Enoch, now a hallowed messenger of God, descended from his celestial vision with the charge to communicate to the world not only the mysteries of heaven, but the corruption of all that had been wrought of good and pure. He was to become the keeper of the divine secret, the scribe of truth, whose quill would be as sharp as an angel's sword. Upon descending from his vision and re-entering his mortal reality, Enoch was no longer the simple man who had once walked with God. He bore with him the wisdom of the stars, the heavens, and the abyss, and what he had witnessed was not merely prophecy, but a stark warning of an unavoidable fate. It was as if God himself, in revealing it, had cast the final die upon a future of either redemption or destruction. The history of the vigilantes is a chronicle of disobedience and sin, yet also of a desperate yearning for something more, a quest for power, freedom, and paradoxically, forbidden love. When the angels descended to earth, it was under the sway of a fervent desire to interact with humanity in a manner that could never be condoned. They were destined to be guardians, but they became the destroyers. The Watchers, 200 potent angels captained by Samjaza, not only descended upon earth but also pledged, through a celestial covenant, that they would not renege on their decision. They traversed the entirety of the land, alluring human women, defying divine injunctions, and engendering offspring that would soon metamorphose into a torment for mankind. These progeny of the Watchers were the Nephilim, colossal beings, monstrous in their stature, yet possessing unimaginable might and ferocity. The land, once replete with beauty and harmony, soon found itself subjugated by an immeasurable force of destruction. The Nephilim, ravenous beings, devoured all that the earth produced, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Mankind could no longer sustain them, for the giants were not merely colossal, they possessed an insatiable hunger, a thirst for annihilation that could never be quenched. And what became of the angels who had become corrupted? What transpired in the hearts of these celestial beings who had strayed from their sacred mission to join the offspring of Eve? The Lord, upon witnessing the events unfolding on earth, summoned the archangels Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, and Raphael. They gazed down from the celestial expanse and beheld the copious shedding of blood, the pervasive corruption consuming creation. It was then that the fallen angels, the Watchers, cried out for mercy. They attempted to intercede, pleading for absolution for their transgressions, but there was no longer any clemency to be found. The abyss awaited them, and yet it was not merely the annihilation of the giants that hung in the balance. There was something more at stake. The spirits of the Nephilim, though vanquished in body, would persist on earth, disseminating anguish and pandemonium. They would transform into the malevolent spirits, the demons that would haunt humanity until the end of days. The Lord of all realms, beholding the fate of the celestial beings, did not waver. He decreed that Azrael be apprehended, that earth be purged, and that justice be meted out with unyielding severity. What the Watchers had wrought would prove instrumental in precipitating widespread devastation, and only a global absolution could reinstate equilibrium. Yet there was an additional element, something utterly unforeseen by any. Amidst this critical juncture, a man would emerge, a paragon of righteousness whose lineage would hold the very key to humanity's perpetuation. And as the Lord spoke to the angel Uriel, "Go unto the man who walks with integrity, and prepare him for the great task that shall come." That man was Noah. We now arrive at a juncture of profound transformation. What commenced as a narrative of despair and devastation would soon evolve into a saga of redemption and hope. The word of God would not falter, justice would be meted out, yet mercy would also find its conduit through one man and his lineage. The future of humanity now rested squarely in the hands of Noah, the chosen one, the righteous amidst the unrighteous. Have you enjoyed it so far? Would you like to know what will become of Noah and how he will tackle the monumental task of preserving humanity? Share your expectations for the next chapter of Enoch's story in the comments. And of course, share this with that friend who is also intrigued by ancient mysteries and tales of prophecy. But before you continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Let's delve together into more secrets concealed within ancient scriptures. Enoch understood that his mission transcended mere chronicling of the transgressions of fallen angels and the Nephilim. What he witnessed and what was divinely imparted to him were not simply empirical data. They constituted grave admonitions, reverberations of a potential future that could be averted were humanity to adhere to the path of righteousness. Yet how could humankind possibly apprehend the profound gravity of this counsel when their own faculties of perception were so thoroughly obscured by ignorance and self-absorption? In a vision, God revealed to Enoch that the earth would be destroyed by a great flood, a cleansing of the wickedness that had defiled the world. However, this purification would not merely be a catastrophe, it would represent an opportunity for a fresh start. God, in his infinite mercy, would prepare a means to salvage what remained of righteous humanity. And that means was embodied in the figure of Noah, the soul man whose purity of heart would lead him to be chosen to survive and preserve the human lineage. The Lord, through a celestial messenger, spoke to Enoch, saying, "Go to Noah and instruct him to build an ark. For I, the Lord, shall bring a deluge upon the earth, yet through him life shall be preserved. From the people he shelters, a new beginning shall emerge." Enoch's mandate, therefore, was not merely to recount the downfall of the Watchers, but also to ready Noah for the impending cataclysm. He was not simply to be a survivor, He was to be the very cornerstone of humanity's ongoing legacy. As Enoch prepared to deliver this message, he contemplated the gravity of what had been entrusted to him. The impending judgment was not solely for the fallen angels and their monstrous offspring, but for all of creation. The earth, which had been defiled by the transgressions of the Watchers, would necessitate purification, and it would demand an immense fortitude and faith to endure the ramifications of human iniquity. The Watchers, those who descended to corrupt humanity, shall face their judgment, Enoch declared, his voice laden with sorrow. They will be cast into the abyss, there to remain, awaiting eternity in torment. Their offspring, the giants, shall vanish from the earth, yet their spirits will persist in haunting the world, sowing discord and despair. The Lord, in speaking to Enoch, was not merely a stern judge, but also a God of mercy. While wickedness shall be extirpated, a new beginning shall come, he declared. Noah shall be the linchpin for the preservation of humankind, and his lineage shall be the seed of a new world, wherein the righteous shall have the opportunity to recommence. Encountering the vision of the deluge, Enoch was overcome by the profound weight of the responsibility that now rested upon his shoulders. He understood that humanity stood in dire need of comprehending the cataclysm looming on the horizon. Yet he also recognized that a great many would undoubtedly repudiate such a stark truth. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but an indispensable one. God's judgment was an inescapable decree, but within it lay the seed of hope. Through Noah and his lineage, divine justice could yet manifest, heralding the commencement of a new epoch. Enoch perceived that, in addition to the punishment of the Watchers, humanity would also undergo a purification. The world would be cleansed by waters, and all its corruptions would be extinguished. However, Enoch also glimpsed the renewal of the world following the deluge. The very waters that would bring destruction would also bestow fertility upon the earth anew. The purification would be absolute, yet the subsequent renewal would be even more magnificent. The cycle of judgment and redemption was poised for its realization. Upon Enoch's return to earth to deliver his message, he brought not only a harbinger of destruction, but also a promise of renewal. He understood that humanity would be bifurcated, divided between those who would heed the divine pronouncement and those who would disregard it. Yet in his heart, he held faith in the Lord's assurance that humankind would be afforded a second chance, an opportunity to embrace the path of righteousness and dwell in amity with creation. What Enoch did not realize was how arduous the acceptance of this truth would prove to be. Many would scoff at him, many would repudiate him, yet he remained at peace, for he knew his mission was accomplished. His charge was to warn, to record, and above all, to trust that divine truth would, in due course, be acknowledged. The deluge, which had been foretold in Enoch's visions, finally arrived with the might of an unstoppable judgment. The earth, having been defiled by the violence of the giants and the iniquity of the Watcher's offspring, was submerged by waters that rose higher than anything humanity had ever known. The very foundations of the earth were rent asunder, and the heavens unleashed an incessant downpour. It was a cataclysm destined to cleanse creation, a tableau of utter devastation, yet imbued with the promise of a fresh Genesis. The Lord, in his righteousness, had issued the warning through Enoch, yet few paid heed. Man, in his hubris and self-sufficiency, believed the words of a mere mortal could be disregarded. Humanity, ensnared by its own desires and transgressions, failed to perceive what lay ahead until it was irrevocably too late. The flood did not arrive as a blind retribution. It was a direct consequence of the wickedness that had permeated the earth. It was, therefore, imperative, for without it, the cycle of corruption would have been interminable. As Enoch was taken to the heavens in a vision, he witnessed the moment the waters began to rise, engulfing all in their path. He saw the anguish of men and women, the pleas that echoed to the heavens. Yet he knew that God's justice could not be undone. The destruction of the wicked and the corrupt was a necessary measure to restore the order and peace that had been defiled by fallen angels and giants. However, amidst the profound tragedy, a glimmer of hope shone through. Noah, the chosen one, had fulfilled the mission entrusted to him. He constructed the ark, a vessel that would serve as his salvation and that of his family. Enoch, acting as God's messenger, had instructed Noah to gather the animals and preserve life. He understood that while the waters engulfed the earth, the ark would be the sole secure refuge for the righteous humanity. The Lord had foretold to Enoch that Noah and his family would be the new progenitors of a renewed world. Yet the burden of carrying all of creation was immense. As the deluge advanced, Enoch witnessed the despair of all those who had refused to heed the divine words. They drowned not merely in the waters, but also in the ignorance that had blinded them to the truth. The giants, the Nephilim, though formidable, could not withstand the power of God. Even the offspring of the Watchers, whose prodigious nature should have ensured their survival, succumbed to the waters of divine judgment. There was no longer any room for corruption in the world. It was to be cleansed. However, within the ark, Noah and his family represented the last vestiges of a righteous humanity. Inside that hallowed space lay the seeds of a new world, the seeds destined to flourish once the waters finally receded. Humanity would be granted a second chance. God's promise was being fulfilled. Through Noah, the human lineage would be restored, ushering in a new era of righteousness. The ark was more than a vessel. It was the very symbol of hope, of renewal, of the fulfillment of divine covenants. After endless days and nights, as the waters finally began to recede, Enoch beheld a transformed landscape, a world seemingly reborn from the very ashes of destruction. The clear skies and tranquil waters were indicators that the judgment, though severe, had served its purpose. The deluge had enveloped the entire earth, but now, with its withdrawal, a fresh creation began to emerge. Life on earth, albeit altered, would endure, and humanity, personified by Noah, would recommence its odyssey. Enoch, "The earth shall be cleansed," said the Lord, "and from Noah and his family humanity shall be restored. They shall inhabit the earth and multiply. But remember my commandment, that righteousness shall prevail over wickedness, and that corruption shall never again enter your hearts." Noah, now more keenly aware of the gravity of his undertaking, gazed upon the vast horizons stretching before him. He knew that creation had been restored, yet he also understood that the charge to preserve the purity and righteousness bestowed upon him was an ongoing endeavor. He and his progeny were to be the custodians of this fresh beginning. The seeds of justice and truth would be transmitted through the generations, and as long as this transmission endured, the earth would flourish in tranquility. However, for this to be realized, humankind would need to grasp the lesson divinely imparted, that wickedness would never be countenanced, and that justice would invariably triumph. Can you grasp the magnitude of this moment? Imagine the agony of a world poised for erasure, yet concurrently the hope of a new generation emerging from the waters. Do you find yourself in Noah's stead? What would it be like to preserve humanity in such an apocalyptic juncture? Block 5. The new beginning. The promise of the restored land. 1,000 words. Following the deluge, as the waters finally receded, a transformed world unfolded before Noah and his kin. The earth, once rife with corruption, was now cleansed, rejuvenated by the purifying might of divine judgment. Yet for Noah, this renewal signified more than just a fresh start for the world. It also marked the fulfillment of God's covenant, the perpetuation of humankind, the opportunity to re-establish the order and righteousness that had been lost. Noah, his heart burdened with the weight of responsibility, understood that the undertaking before him would prove formidable. Although the earth had been cleansed, The seeds of wickedness still lingered, and humanity would need to glean lessons from its past transgressions. The fate of the Watchers and the Nephilim could not be consigned to oblivion, for a recurrence of such missteps might usher in devastation anew. Noah and his progeny would be compelled to live righteously, upholding the divine statutes and perpetually recalling that humankind's salvation was not a product of their own deserts, but rather an act of divine clemency. Upon disembarking from the ark, Noah surveyed the horizon and beheld the world laid out before his eyes. The trees previously ravaged by the deluge were now flourishing anew. The animals he had safeguarded within the ark were now at liberty to inhabit the earth. The sky was unclouded, and the sunlight appeared more luminous than ever before. It was a new world, a world devoid of the transgressions and depravities of bygone days. Yet Noah understood that to preserve this nascent creation, humanity would be compelled to tread a different path than that which it had previously followed. It was then that the Lord spoke to Noah, establishing an everlasting covenant with him and his descendants. "I shall cause the earth never again to be annihilated by water," the Lord declared. "This bow I behold in the heavens shall serve as the token of my covenant with you. Whenever the rains descend, the bow will be a perpetual reminder that destruction shall not return, but that mercy shall prevail." Noah, in his humility, accepted the solemn commitment to be the custodian of this covenant. He understood that his progeny would play a pivotal role in the preservation of the earth, in the maintenance of order, and in honoring the pact established with God. With this promise, he felt emboldened, yet simultaneously acutely aware of the significant burden that rested upon him and his offspring. The responsibility of engendering a new generation that would adhere to divine principles was by no means trivial. As Noah and his family began to lay new foundations for life on earth, Enoch, still under divine guidance, glimpsed in a new vision the destiny of Noah's descendants. He witnessed that although the earth was renewed, temptations and challenges would persist. Evil would not be eradicated once and for all. The lessons of justice, righteousness, and purity needed to be passed down from generation to generation, lest humanity lapse back into corruption. In his visions, Enoch also beheld the future of his own lineage. He knew he would not be the last to bear the burden of recounting the narrative of God and the fallen angels. The saga that commenced with him would continue to be inscribed by those who followed in the footsteps of the righteous. His mission was thus unequivocal: to document and transmit the events he had witnessed so that future generations might not forget the transgressions of the past. As humanity embarked on a new beginning, Enoch penned his final words, serving as both a witness and a prophet of God. He understood his task was complete, yet recognized that the endeavors of others, those who would follow, would be of equal significance. The perpetual cycle of judgment and redemption would persist, with each generation being summoned to make a definitive choice between the path of righteousness and the trajectory of corruption. Following the deluge, the earth began to reassert itself. The world, once submerged, gradually emerged, and life once again flourished. Saplings sprouted, fields teemed with grain, and animals resumed their unfettered perambulations across the land. Yet Noah, though blessed with a fresh lease on life, understood that renewal carried with it a sacred obligation. He and his family were now charged with safeguarding creation and living in accordance with the principles God had revealed. As Noah and his family disembarked from the ark, God, with his compassionate voice, addressed them. He made an eternal promise, establishing a covenant not only with Noah, but with all of humanity that would descend from his lineage. "With humanity, I will make an everlasting covenant," the Lord declared. "I will never again destroy the earth with a flood. The bow that I set in the sky will be the sign of my promise that the waters will never again bring destruction to the earth." Enoch, in his visions, observed with keen attention what transpired below, for he understood that God's covenant was not merely a promise of preservation, but also a perpetual reminder that divine justice must be upheld. The rainbow, with its resplendent hues, was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a potent symbol, a pact between the Creator and creation, a testament to God's profound mercy. Each time rain fell and the ark manifested in the heavens, it would serve as a beacon of renewed hope and God's unwavering faithfulness. For Noah and his family, the rainbow was more than a symbol of peace. It was a covenant of protection. Gazing upon the heavens, they knew God was with them, and as long as they remained righteous, the earth would continue to be blessed. Yet, an implicit admonition accompanied this pact. Humanity bore the onus of their choices. Evil could resurface, but by adhering to the path of righteousness, mankind would be shielded by divine clemency. The crux lay in living by the tenets divinely imparted to the just. Enoch, in his wisdom, understood that the ultimate test of God's covenant with humanity lay in human action. Mankind would be called to live righteously, for God's mercy did not imply that evil could triumph. The covenant was not a guarantee of unconditional protection, but rather an invitation to live in accordance with divine laws. Obedience to God would be the linchpin in preserving the covenant, thereby preventing the recurrence of the cycle of destruction. And so the new generation, Noah's descendants, began to disperse across the earth. Each of their actions, thoughts, and choices would determine the future of the covenant with God. Should Noah's descendants elect to tread the path of righteousness, the rainbow would continue to shine as a sign that God was with them. But if they were to fall into corruption once more, the earth, though never again to be destroyed by waters, would face ruin in other respects, for the creation God had bestowed could not flourish without the uprightness of humankind. Noah, along with his progeny, embarked upon the foundational establishment of a new society. He was keenly aware that the reinitiation of humankind entailed not merely the restoration of the earth, but also the profound renewal of the hearts and minds of its inhabitants. He commenced imparting to his offspring, and subsequently to their descendants, the precepts and ways of God. They were henceforth entrusted with the sacred duty of nurturing righteousness and verity. Nevertheless, Noah understood that this nascent beginning would not confer immunity from malevolence. The path to safeguarding the covenant necessitated perpetual vigilance, unwavering obedience, and steadfast faith in the divine. As Enoch observed from his visions, he perceived that the path ahead would be arduous. Although the covenant was eternal, humanity would be compelled to contend against the malevolent forces that still permeated the world. God's pact with Noah was not merely a pledge of physical preservation, but a solemn promise of spiritual redemption. Future generations would perpetually need to recall God's boundless mercy and the imperative of living in concord with His divine laws. Even as the rainbow arched across the sky, a resplendent emblem of covenant and hope, humanity remained perilously susceptible to the insidious allure of evil. Though the earth had been cleansed by the waters, the spiritual tribulations that had corrupted mortal men and fallen angels persisted with undiminished vigor. Enoch, perhaps more than any other, understood this. In his profound visions, he beheld Noah's descendants grappling with the selfsame trials that had ensnared humanity prior to the great deluge, the pervasive corruption of the human heart and the seductive enticements of malevolent forces that ceaselessly sought to annihilate the divine creation. What Enoch observed in his visions was disquieting. Even after the purification of the waters, the seeds of evil sown by the watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim, still lingered. The forces of corruption had not vanished with the flood. They were merely biding their time, awaiting the opportune moment to resurface, to find a fresh ingress through humanity's frailties. Enoch perceived that, even with God's clemency and the rainbow as a token of his covenant, humankind was far from liberated from the perpetual struggle between good and evil. As Noah and his sons endeavored to live in accordance with God's laws, Enoch perceived that the cycle of righteousness and destruction would be eternal. The narrative of humankind would be indelibly marked by choices. Man, as a free agent, possessed the capacity to tread the path of light or to once more succumb to the clutches of darkness. Divine judgment would not be a singular occurrence, but rather a recurring phenomenon whenever humanity faltered in upholding the tenets of justice and rectitude. Enoch understood that God's mercy was infinite, but he also knew that judgment would be unavoidable whenever wickedness transgressed the bounds of divine patience. As a witness to both the past and the future, Enoch comprehended that the struggle between light and darkness was cyclical, and that humanity's destiny would invariably hinge upon the choices made by each generation. The covenant established by God with Noah was not an assurance that justice would be perpetually preserved, but rather a promise that the opportunity to restore equilibrium would always exist, provided that mankind repented of its transgressions. Noah's progeny began to disperse across the earth, and humanity experienced the ebb and flow of the cycle of righteousness. Within their hearts, men still possessed the choice between obedience to God and corruption, between the light of justice and the darkness of selfishness. Evil was never far, and the Watchers, though physically removed from earth, still influenced the world through the malevolent spirits, the demons that had arisen from the Nephilim. In his visions, Enoch perceived the spirits of the giants tormenting humanity, endeavoring to beguile men once more into disobedience. Devoid of corporeal form, their presence nonetheless permeated all that was malevolent. Enoch witnessed how future generations, even those divinely favored by covenant with God, remained susceptible to the insidious influence of the forces of darkness. Nevertheless, he also foresaw that the justice of God would ultimately triumph, though frequently necessitating a cycle of destruction to reinstate order. Each generation will be tested, the Lord said to Enoch, but I will never falter in my promise. Justice will be served, but mercy will always be afforded to those who repent. Noah, cognizant of the tribulations his lineage would encounter, endeavored to instruct his offspring in living in accordance with divine truth. He comprehended that the perpetuation of righteousness on earth would hinge not solely on his own adherence, but on the fidelity of his progeny. Noah imparted to them the significance of the covenant with God, underscoring that while mercy was boundless, wickedness would invariably exact a toll. For humanity to persist in its flourishing, it would be incumbent upon them to fulfill their obligation, opting to lead lives of rectitude. As Noah's generation spread across the earth, new societies began to emerge. Noah and his sons established roots in various parts of the world, and humanity's cycle seemed to have found a renewed opportunity to flourish. However, as Enoch had foreseen, evil, though momentarily vanquished by the flood, would never disappear entirely. It would invariably find a way to re-infiltrate the depths of the human soul. While Noah, along with his family, endeavored to impart the ways of God to the nascent generations, Enoch, through his visions, observed with disquiet the resurgence of malevolent forces. He was cognizant that humanity, despite its restoration and blessings under the covenant, remained perpetually susceptible to succumbing to temptation. The most profound peril resided not solely in the overt actions of humankind, but in the insidious influences emanating from the spirits of the Nephilim, the progeny of the Watchers, whose souls had been eternally condemned to roam the earth. These spirits, known as demons, began to sow discord and corruption, attempting to ruin the purity of the new generations. Though lacking physical bodies, the demons maintained a potent spiritual presence and were capable of seducing human hearts toward evil. They influenced humanity's deepest desires, inciting pride, wrath, and avarice. Their mission was unequivocal: to render mankind worthy of damnation once more by corrupting souls and leading men back to sin. Enoch observed that these demons did not operate independently. There was a collaboration between them and the powerful figures of the earth, those who had turned away from God and succumbed to temptation. Numerous rulers, leaders, and tribal chieftains had begun to engage in occult practices, seeking forbidden power and knowledge. They had forgotten the teachings of Noah and his righteous father, Enoch. The endeavor to attain eternity and defy divine laws, emulating the actions of the Watchers, was once again on the rise. But the Lord, in his wisdom, would not leave humanity without a warning. Enoch was once again chosen to be a messenger. He foresaw what was to come, and knew that once more a divine judgment would be necessary to restore righteousness. The Lord spoke to Enoch in a voice grave and immutable. Humanity will be tested again. Demons will endeavor to seduce those who have strayed from me, but my hand will be extended so that truth may prevail. In his visions, Enoch witnessed that the return of demons would no longer be a matter of physical struggle, but a spiritual battle. The forces of evil would slowly corrupt the minds of men, instilling doubt, fear, and disobedience. The demons would continue to attempt to subvert God's laws and corrupt those most susceptible to temptation. Enoch perceived that sin would no longer be a simple matter of external actions, but of internal choices, made within the heart of each human being. However, Enoch also discerned a promise on the horizon. Those who remained steadfast in God's covenant, who lived with righteousness and truth, would be shielded by divine light. The Lord would imbue the righteous with the fortitude to withstand temptations. Humanity would never be entirely bereft of succor. The forces of malevolence, though they might endeavor to obliterate peace and purity, would invariably be vanquished by the unceasing presence of goodness, provided the righteous remained unwavering in their faith. Enoch understood that his mission was no longer solely to record the revelations he had received, but also to apprise future generations of the spiritual perils that lay in wait. He grasped that humanity's greatest challenge would not merely be physical evils, such as giants or wars, but the internal corruption that could fester within the hearts of men. Temptations would be insidious, often masquerading as knowledge or power, yet the message would invariably be the same: mankind must choose righteousness, truth, and faith in God, or face divine judgment. As Enoch prepared to impart his final words, he contemplated the legacy of the Watchers and the lesson they had bequeathed. Humanity was now cognizant of the consequences that ensued when divine edicts were transgressed. Nevertheless, continuous discernment would be requisite to ensure that malevolence did not insidiously reassert itself. The struggle against nefarious forces would be perpetual, yet the righteous, those who adhered to the path of verity, would invariably emerge triumphant. As generations have passed, humanity has experienced a perpetual cycle of decline and resurgence. While some remained steadfast in their covenant with God, others succumbed to the temptations and deceptions of malevolent spirits, descendants of the Nephilim. The world, though restored, was not impervious to corruption, and the presence of evil continued to haunt the earth. Nevertheless, as Enoch knew, the consummation of all things was being inexorably orchestrated by an immutable divine judgment. The visions Enoch received depicted the conclusion of this cycle, an event wherein all actions, both of past and future generations, would be recompensed or punished according to God's judgment. He beheld a grand celestial tribunal, where the righteous would be distinguished from the ungodly, and where each soul would be confronted with the choices they had made in life. In his final moments of prescience, Enoch beheld the manifestation of the Son of Man, the celestial entity destined to rise and preside over the judgment of all nations and peoples. This being, radiating an immense and unblemished luminescence, would serve as the ultimate arbiter from whose gaze nothing would remain concealed. The righteous would be ushered into an eternal kingdom, a sanctuary of profound peace, effulgent light, and unending repose. The wicked, those who had succumbed to corruption, would be cast into a bottomless abyss, there to endure the inexorable repercussions of their transgressions. The spirits of the Nephilim, who had been cursed and scattered, were destined to be reunited on the great day of judgment. Though disembodied, their souls would continue to exert influence upon the world, sowing destruction and despair until their ultimate penance was fulfilled. Enoch foresaw a monumental spiritual conflict looming on the horizon, wherein the righteous, armed with God's truth, would confront the forces of darkness. Yet, as is ever the case, victory would belong to the divine light, and evil would ultimately be extirpated. Enoch, acutely aware of the gravity of this vision, felt the weight of his responsibility as the messenger of truth. His mission was not merely to recount the events, but also to apprise future men and women of what was to come. The final judgment would not be a simple catastrophe. It would be the conclusion of an epoch where souls would be weighed and where God's mercy would intersect with the imperative of justice. "Write, Enoch," said the Lord, "so that all may know that my justice is righteous and my mercy is abundant, but those who have rebelled against me shall have no further place in my presence." Enoch understood that judgment was not a threat, but a promise that, at long last, evil would no longer hold dominion, creation would be purified forever, and God's justice would prevail. But the path toward it would be arduous and fraught with choices. Humanity still had the opportunity to avert eternal damnation, though this would necessitate faith, repentance, and a life of righteousness. He also saw those who would be saved, those who, despite the hardships, chose to follow the path of truth and justice would be rewarded with eternal peace. Their bodies and souls would be restored, and they would live in a realm where evil would never again touch them. They would walk with God in the presence of His light forever. But this reward would not be easily granted. It would depend on faithfulness, the courage to confront evil, and perseverance through the trials that life would bring them. Enoch, in his wisdom, grasped that judgment was not merely a divine decree, but also a human choice. What transpired at the final judgment would hinge to a significant extent on the choices each individual made throughout their life. The decision to live righteously or to tread the paths of corruption would be the determinant of each soul's eternal destiny. Following the final judgment, after all human choices had been weighed and the fate of each soul sealed, Enoch received a final vision of hope. He beheld a new beginning, something that transcended all he had previously witnessed. The divine judgment would not merely signify an end, but also inaugurate an absolute renewal. The world, which had been defiled by sin and disobedience, would be definitively purified, and a new creation would emerge, a new heaven and a new earth, wherein the light of righteousness and peace would reign eternally. This vision was grand and sublime. Enoch beheld the heavens being renewed as if a new mantle of stars were supplanting the old. The earth, previously marred by corruption, flourished in an astonishing manner, adorned with mountains of gold and rivers of crystalline water. The environment was flawless, devoid of sickness, pain, or suffering. Nature, more vibrant than ever, stretched as far as the eye could see, embodying the complete harmony between creation and the Creator. This is the end of all that was wicked. The Lord declared to Enoch, "And the dawn of the eternal, those who have remained steadfast to my word, who have chosen righteousness and truth, shall dwell here in peace for all eternity. They will be integral to a restored creation, where wickedness shall never again find purchase." At the heart of this new creation, Enoch beheld a vast mount, towering higher than any mountain ever witnessed, upon which the Lord was seated on his throne. Surrounding him, the righteous, all those who had elected to live according to his will, sang eternal praises, celebrating the restoration of divine harmony. The righteous, now immortal, no longer felt fear or pain. They existed in perfect union with God, in the absolute repose of his embrace. Enoch experienced an ineffable peace upon witnessing the world's complete transformation, God's promise fulfilled in its entirety. But most strikingly of all was the presence of a tree, immense and luminous at the center of the new heaven and new earth. "This is the tree of life," said the Lord. "With it all the righteous shall live eternally, in perfect communion with creation. They shall eat of its fruit and be forever at peace." Enoch understood that this tree was not merely a symbol of everlasting life, but a reminder of humanity's commitment to God, a renewed covenant wherein the seeds of righteousness, truth, and peace would flourish perpetually. With this vision of a new beginning, Enoch grasped the profound depth of God's mercy. Divine judgment was not solely aimed at destruction, but at restoration. It was as if all that had been corrupted by humanity and the Watchers was now being returned to its pristine state. And for this to occur, humanity would have to be purified. However, subsequent to this purification, creation would be granted a fresh opportunity to flourish, this time unburdened by the shadows of corruption that once obscured the heart of man. "This is the eternal plan," the Lord declared. "All that I have wrought shall be restored." But remember, Enoch, the end of all things will be the commencement of a new cycle. For this to transpire, the righteous must remain steadfast in truth. Evil shall not be utterly vanquished, yet judgment will be everlasting. The cycle recurs, but the ultimate triumph shall invariably belong to the light. Enoch comprehended that this vision of redemption was not solely for him, but for all ensuing generations. He was aware that humanity would still confront tribulations, yet the promise of a new heaven and a new earth would perpetually subsist, serving as a living hope for those who persevered in their faith. Redemption, consequently, was not a singular occurrence. Rather, it would constitute the ultimate destiny for all who elected righteousness and abided by the will of God. With a heart overflowing, Enoch penned his final words, no longer merely as a prophet, but as a testament to God's enduring promise. He knew his revelations would be perused and cherished by all future generations, serving as a poignant reminder that despite the shadows and sins humanity might confront, an inextinguishable light would forever guide them back toward eternal peace. And you, how do you envision this new heaven and new earth? What would life be like in a world devoid of suffering, where all exist in perfect accord with creation and with God? What would you do if presented with the opportunity to inhabit such a realm? Share your vision in the comments. And if this exploration of Enoch has resonated deeply within your soul, subscribe to the channel to continue delving into the hidden truths and narratives that have shaped our world. We are merely at the genesis of this journey, with a wealth of further revelations yet to unfold. Although Enoch's vision of the world's ultimate restoration was imbued with hope and light, he understood that a considerable journey still lay ahead before humanity could attain the fullness of redemption. In his final revelations, Enoch glimpsed the twilight of the earth, an epoch fraught with profound trials wherein the forces of darkness would endeavor once more to vitiate the hearts of men. He foresaw a definitive spiritual conflagration, a conflict pitting the legions of light against the cohorts of shadow, which would ultimately arbitrate humanity's eternal destiny. The final days would herald an era of profound tribulation, wherein temptations and malevolence would manifest with unprecedented allure and guile. Enoch perceived the nations of the world succumbing to the siren calls of hubris, avarice, and the unquenchable thirst for dominion. Men and women, formerly paragons of righteousness, would be ensnared by the temptation to forsake divine precepts and tread the path of perdition. However, what was revealed to Enoch was not solely a panorama of encroaching darkness, but also a solemn assurance. Evil, however formidable its might, would ultimately falter, for the divine luminescence would invariably ascend to vanquish it. In his visions, Enoch foresaw that the end of days would commence with portents in the heavens and upon the earth. The sun, moon, and stars would exhibit anomalous behavior. The very forces of nature would be thrown into disarray, and a multitude of men would succumb to despair in the face of these apocalyptic signs. Nevertheless, those who steadfastly adhered to God's truth and justice would be fortified by his divine light. They would harbor no fear of the encroaching darkness, for they knew that ultimate victory belonged to God. "The last days shall be as the days of old," the Lord said unto Enoch, "when men and women were called to choose between good and evil. But the difference is that now, more than ever, truth shall be revealed in all its glory. The righteous shall prevail, and the wicked shall be brought to final judgment." The Lord also revealed to Enoch that, following this monumental spiritual confrontation, the world would undergo an even more profound transformation. Humanity, having been purified through tribulations, would finally be capable of living in perfect harmony with creation. The hearts of men, previously fractured and corrupted, would be restored to reflect the true image of God. They would dwell in peace, no longer subjugated by the forces of selfishness and disobedience, but guided by divine wisdom and justice. Enoch also beheld the advent of the Son of Man, the ultimate arbiter, who would descend to preside over the new heavens and the new earth. He would usher in the eternal dominion, a realm devoid of further demise or suffering, wherein the righteous would be recompensed with everlasting life and the wicked would be utterly extirpated. The Son of Man would reign with sagacity and clemency, and all men and women, without exception, would acknowledge his sovereignty. "When the Son of Man returns," the Lord declared, "he will gather all who have done his will and grant them a place in the celestial abode. Those who denied him and pursued the path of disobedience, however, will be eternally separated from his presence." Enoch realized that during these final days, it would be imperative for the righteous to remain steadfast in their faith, as the temptations would be greater than ever before. The forces of darkness would masquerade in alluring and subtle guises, attempting to deceive even the wisest. He perceived that only those who were genuinely committed to God, who walked in the light of his word, would be capable of resisting deception and holding firm to the truth. As Enoch's vision deepened, he also observed the reaction of the righteous in the last days. Far from being disheartened, they would rise in faith, knowing that even in the most trying times, victory was already assured. Enoch saw the righteous in their moments of adversity, facing challenges with courage and faithfulness, trusting in the Lord who would guide them to the very end. Enoch therefore contemplated the nature of this final battle, considering how humanity, in its freedom of choice, could still opt between light and darkness. The Lord said to him, "The battle will never be easy, Enoch, but victory is assured for those who remain steadfast in my word and in my righteousness. Even when all seems lost, the outcome will be my victory and the victory of those who have chosen the good." Following the monumental spiritual conflict that would ultimately decide the fate of all humankind, Enoch experienced a final, resplendent vision of hope, wherein humanity's future attained its ultimate, authentic fulfillment. He beheld a new heaven and a new earth, a sanctified creation where malevolence would henceforth be utterly extirpated. This envisioned epoch represented not merely a novel terrestrial realm, but a profound and comprehensive restoration of humanity itself, its sacred covenant with the divine, its intrinsic relationships with fellow beings, and its harmonious integration with the natural world. Enoch observed that following the final judgment, the righteous would be ushered into this new reality, where peace would reign supreme. Those who had resisted temptation, who had remained steadfast in their adherence to God's word and his principles, could now find repose in the perfection of divine creation. Pain, suffering, injustice, and death would be eradicated as the original harmony that God established at the dawn of the world would be restored. At the heart of this new earth, Enoch beheld the throne of God, more resplendent than any star ever witnessed, and surrounding him, the righteous, the martyrs, and all those who had chosen to live in rectitude. They were now in eternal communion with God, devoid of fear, free from suffering, with hearts unblemished and minds at peace. The kingdom of God extended throughout all creation, and all men and women lived in harmony with the earth and with the Creator, as it was meant to be from the very beginning. Enoch also beheld the tree of life, which was now accessible to all the righteous. Those who partook of its fruit lived eternally in everlasting joy. The pure waters flowing from the throne of God gave life to all creation, and the earth became a restored paradise, where nature flourished unhindered, and where righteousness and peace were a constant reality. The Lord, in his infinite goodness, said unto Enoch, Behold, Enoch, what I have prepared for them that have kept my commandments. They shall dwell in this new creation, without pain, without tears, without sin. They shall be in my presence forever, and the creation shall be their eternal abode. Enoch apprehended that this new world was not merely a physical realm, but an eternal state of unity with God. He foresaw that in a distant future, the children of the righteous would dwell, never again to be corrupted by evil. Sin would hold no dominion over them. Future generations would be instructed in divine truths, and righteousness would be practiced unceasingly, so that everlasting peace might reign without end. The righteous, now immortal, would be guided by God's unwavering light. The struggle against the forces of evil would cease, for evil itself would no longer exist. Suffering and death would recede into distant memory, posing no further threat to the righteous inhabiting this restored realm. Each soul would find its appointed place within the grand abode of God, where love and justice reigned supreme, governing all hearts. Enoch, upon beholding this vision of eternal redemption, experienced a profound serenity pervading his spirit. He understood that humanity, notwithstanding its imperfections and lapses, would be afforded the chance to attain perfection through the divine grace and the righteousness of God. The ultimate confrontation between good and evil would thus represent merely the final trial preceding an everlasting repose, wherein the righteous could finally inhabit the existence for which they were eternally intended, in complete accord with the Creator. This is the conclusion of the narrative, the Lord declared to Enoch, but it also marks the inception of a new, eternal epoch. Peace shall be the legacy bestowed upon those who have elected to tread the path of righteousness and truth. Enoch, now fully cognizant of what lay ahead, concluded his mission. He understood that future generations would require instruction regarding the ways of God, the significance of justice, and the virtue of righteousness. However, above all else, Enoch grasped that humanity must never forget the divine promise. Evil, no matter how assiduously it strove to corrupt the hearts of men, would never triumph over the light of God. Enoch, after divulging all the secrets entrusted to him and bestowing upon humanity the profound revelations of God, contemplated the legacy he would bequeath. He understood that his mission was drawing to a close, yet his words and writings were destined to serve as a compass for generations hence, a beacon to navigate the shadows of arduous times. Having glimpsed both the past and the future of mankind, he now, with a heart brimming with sagacity and benevolence, prepared to imprint his everlasting mark upon the annals of history. Write down all that you have seen and heard, the Lord commanded him, so that future generations may not forget what has been revealed. Let the wisdom of the ancients be the foundation upon which the righteous shall build the future. Enoch, charged with the weighty responsibility of conveying divine truth, understood that his role transcended that of a mere prophet. He was a custodian of divine remembrance, an individual divinely selected to safeguard that which would otherwise be lost to the oblivion of many. He was keenly aware that challenging times lay ahead, and that, as has invariably been the case, malevolence would endeavor to ensnare humanity through deception. Yet he also possessed the profound certainty that so long as the righteous diligently preserved the illuminated truth, the luminescence of God would never be extinguished. Enoch's final mission, therefore, was to impart a clear teaching to those who would follow him. In his last days, Enoch gathered his sons and disciples, instructing them to steadfastly uphold their faith in God, to perpetually pursue truth and justice, and to eschew the temptations of evil. He understood that as long as humanity possessed free will, the peril of straying from the righteous path would invariably exist. Yet he also knew that unwavering fidelity to God would invariably yield eternal rewards. "Do not forget the words I leave you," Enoch declared, "for they are the words of eternal life. Humanity will be tested, yet the truth of God will ever prove mightier than any falsehood. The choice between good and evil shall be made in every passing moment. But remember that in the end, the justice of God will prevail." The descendants of Enoch, as well as those who followed in his wake, carried his words and teachings through the generations, perpetuating the memory of the great prophet. His writings, such as the Book of Enoch, became a beacon for the righteous, a hallowed text that would continue to instruct men and women of faith until the end of days. Enoch's teachings were not merely a summons to repentance, but a perpetual reminder that good would invariably prevail, however arduous the struggle might be. Enoch's ultimate vision was not merely one of destruction or judgment, but of hope and redemption. He understood that humanity could attain a state of eternal harmony with God, should they elect to live in accordance with divine principles. The promise of a new heaven and a new earth was not merely a far-off dream, but a future reality, awaiting those who would remain steadfast until the very end. As Enoch contemplated his role in the annals of human history, he apprehended that his mandate extended beyond mere prophecy concerning the future or the transcription of visions bestowed upon him. His genuine legacy would be the testament of a life consecrated to righteousness and the veracity of God. He was cognizant that the final days were at hand, and that humanity would be compelled to confront the ultimate crucible of faith and fortitude. Yet, he also knew that the righteous, those who remained steadfast in their adherence to divine tenets, would constitute the very bedrock of a new dawn. Enoch, then, made a final plea to his followers. The end times are an inescapable reality. The final judgment will be meted out, but he who walks in God's light shall be protected, even in the darkest hours. The struggle will be arduous, but as ever, the righteous will prevail. He knew the latter days would usher in an era of profound upheaval. Deception would permeate the globe, ensnaring countless individuals through the machinations of false prophets and insidious falsehoods. The forces of darkness, once vanquished by the deluge, would re-emerge with formidable vigor, cloaked in the guises of wisdom, might, and even piety. A multitude would be beguiled by the allure of power and opulence, consequently forsaking the paths of verity and uprightness. Nevertheless, Enoch also perceived that during this period of tribulation, the righteous would be illuminated by divine wisdom. They would serve as beacons of light in a darkened world, and their unyielding faith would stand as a testament to the unfailing truth of God. Even in the direst circumstances, the righteous would be guided by celestial illumination, their actions mirroring God's justice and love. They would be tasked with acting as intermediaries between the Creator and humanity, instrumental in restoring what had been corrupted and in paving the way for the advent of the Son of Man, the ultimate judge. Enoch, in his wisdom, knew his mission was nearing its culmination. He had fulfilled his charge of admonishing mankind regarding the perils of sin and corruption. Yet he also understood that his legacy ought not to consist solely of a compendium of pronouncements. Posterity would require not only to internalize the doctrines he had bequeathed, but more crucially, to perpetuate these teachings, thereby sustaining the effulgent flame of truth. The preparedness for the final epoch, according to Enoch, was fundamentally a spiritual undertaking. Humanity would need to be fortified to withstand the insidious allurements of malevolence and steadfastly uphold the righteousness of God. He foresaw that the final days would be characterized by immense trials and calamities, yet also by profound miracles and divine portents. The return of God, personified by the Son of Man, would herald a moment of demarcation between good and evil. However, for the righteous, this epoch would signify a period of immense recompense. They would be exalted, inheriting their eternal patrimony and dwelling in perpetual communion with the divine. Suffering and anguish would evanesce, and humanity, finally cleansed, would luxuriate in an unassailable tranquility. When the time comes, the righteous will be prepared, the Lord said unto Enoch. They shall know the truth, and the truth shall set them free. The time of the great tribulation shall be mankind's final opportunity to choose, but he who abides in my word shall be saved. Enoch understood that the righteous had no cause to dread the end of days, for they were safeguarded by divine light. They would serve as beacons of hope amidst despair, a luminescence in a world cloaked in darkness. Their faith would be the steadfast anchor, holding them firm against the encroaching tempest. And through them, God's truth would be borne witness to, even unto the uttermost parts of the earth. The end of days, as Enoch had foretold, was nigh. Though the cycle of sin and redemption seemed unending, the final word would always belong to God. Enoch knew that upon his departure from earth, his work would not be concluded. He had meticulously recorded all that had been revealed to him, yet he understood that the legacy of his words and visions would continue to resonate through future generations until the very end of the world. Enoch, imbued with the wisdom gleaned from his arduous journey, made a final impassioned plea to humankind. Time is rapidly dwindling. The truth I have unveiled to you shall serve as a beacon in the most profound darkness. Ever bear in mind that God's mercy is boundless, yet his justice is equally immutable. There is no evading divine judgment, but a path to redemption invariably exists for those who elect to adhere to the truth. He knew that as long as humanity endured, the choice between good and evil would perpetually remain an option. The cycle of sin might recur, yet concurrently, the prospect of redemption would likewise be eternally presented. The Son of Man, he who would arrive to judge the living and the dead, would personify the culmination of the conflict between light and darkness, and it would be he who would shepherd humankind toward their ultimate inheritance, everlasting peace and communion with God. In his final vision, Enoch beheld the magnificent recompense awaiting the righteous. Those who had withstood temptation, who had steadfastly adhered to God's faith and truth, would be summoned to inhabit the new creation, the new heavens, and the new earth. Henceforth, there would be no more weeping or pain, as all would be restored to its pristine condition. Humanity, in that epoch, would experience genuine peace and concord, dwelling in communion with the Creator, in a state of unblemished purity and righteousness. My work is now accomplished, Enoch thought. Now all that remains is to trust that future generations will tread the path of truth. I have left the testimony, I have delivered the words, and now the choice rests with each of us. The path of light is open, but the path of darkness still beckons. The Lord, upon witnessing Enoch's completed work, said to him, I have summoned you to be a witness to the truth. And now your testimony shall be imparted to all nations. Even after your departure, the words you have penned, the teachings you have conveyed, will serve as a beacon for those who seek my countenance." Enoch, peering into the future, understood that the legacy he had bequeathed transcended a mere cautionary tale. It was an exhortation for humanity to live with heightened awareness, to make choices that mirrored divine justice and benevolence. He knew that the testament of the righteous, like himself, would perpetually serve as a beacon in times of profound darkness, and that even when the world appeared irredeemably lost, there would invariably be those who championed the cause of truth. Enoch was not concerned with his own fate. He knew that in the end, he would be a part of the new heaven and the new earth. But what troubled him most was the future of humanity. He foresaw that the decision to follow God or to stray from him would not be an easy one. Yet he also knew that God, in his infinite mercy, would always offer a chance to those willing to repent and return to the path of righteousness. Before departing earth, Enoch offered a final prayer. "Lord, may those who hear these words find the light that belongs to you. May they not stray from the path of truth, nor be seduced by the deceptions of evil. May humanity never forget that redemption is ever within reach for those who seek your countenance." With these words, Enoch fulfilled his mission, leaving an eternal legacy for all generations. He knew his journey had reached its conclusion, but the words he imparted would continue to resonate in the hearts of all who chose to walk the path of light. The end of days was still distant, but the testimony of Enoch, the man who walked with God, would forever be remembered as a beacon for those who would tread in pursuit of truth until the final hour. Now we'd like to hear your opinion. What are your thoughts on the legacy of Enoch and the promise of redemption for the righteous? How can you apply his teachings in your daily life, even amidst trials? What do you believe future generations can glean from Enoch's testament? Share your reflections in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe now to continue following the unfolding revelations of Enoch and the eternal lessons he has bequeathed to us.